everyone. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 7 de
Welcome to meeting number 7 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics.
De la Chambre de Communes. Pursuant to Standing Order 1038H, the committee will proceed today to a briefing session with the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, followed by a briefing session of the Commissioner of Lobbying. And just a reminder to everyone about the earpieces, please be mindful about where they're placed on the desk. And I would like to start by welcoming Monsieur Philippe Dufresne, who is the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. Mr. Dufresne, I know you've been extremely busy lately, and I want to thank you for being with the committee this morning. And, sir, please start. 5 minutes. It's been a while. I'm sure we have lots to catch up on. Go ahead, sir.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee for inviting me to appear before you to discuss the work of my office and the importance of prioritizing privacy. As Privacy Commissioner of Canada, my mission is to protect and promote individuals' fundamental right to privacy. This includes overseeing compliance with both the Privacy Act, which applies to federal institutions, and the Personal Information Protection and Electronics Documents Act, so PIPEDA, Canada's federal private sector privacy law.
Personal data is being collected and shared than ever before, often across borders. This is an essential mandate for Canadians. From the moment that we start our day and check our phones until the time that we wind down by streaming music or a favorite show, our personal data is being sought. New technologies bring new opportunities to connect, to create, and to innovate. For organizations, personal information can be used to offer tailored services, refine operations, and evaluate results. But this also brings risks to our privacy. It is a different reality than just a decade ago. Canada's privacy laws, and even my office, were designed in and for a pre-digital time. Depuis ma nomination au poste de commissaire à la protection de la vie privée du Canada,
Since becoming Privacy Commissioner of Canada in 2022, I have advocated for modernization of Canada's privacy laws and for increased investment in data protection. There's a lot of change, and so we all must be committed to protecting personal information.
To Canadians. The OPC's latest public opinion research found that 9 in 10 are concerned about their privacy. 62% believe that government respects their privacy rights.
Excusez-moi, je suis désolé, mais...
Apologies for interrupting. I'm not hearing interpretation. Also, the French channel is usually on 3. My assistant is also struggling to hear interpretation. It's coming in and out. I would like for us to be able to do a test.
OK. Je m'excuse, Monsieur Thériault et Monsieur Dufresne.
Apologies, Monsieur Thériault, Monsieur Dufresne. Perhaps we can ask the technicians to look into the issue.
Problème, est-ce que ça corrigé maintenant ou non?
02 et là, ça fonctionne. Là.
Ça fonctionne? OK. On va recommencer avec votre...
We're going to restart, Mr. Dufresne. You can take all your time and please start over. From the beginning? Mr. Thériault, does he need to start from the beginning? No, just start from where we left off. Thank you.
J'espère que ça fonctionne. Privacy matters to Canadians. The OPC's latest public opinion research found that 9 in 10 are concerned about their privacy. 62% believe that government respects their privacy rights, and only 40% say the same about business. The survey also showed that more than 2/3 of parents are moderately to extremely concerned about their children's privacy online. The number of privacy complaints to my office is rising. In the first quarter of the year, the number of complaints had increased by 51% over the same quarter last year. This, along with increases in breach notifications, highlights the need for efficiencies, reform, and resources. Une condition préalable indispensable à l'installation.
A necessary precondition to establishing trust in the digital economy is a privacy regulator with sufficient capacity to respond to privacy breaches and to carry out timely investigations. It is within this context that my office works to provide resources and guidance, respond to major privacy incidents, and keep pace with an ever-evolving digital world.
L'année dernière, j'ai établi
Last year, I established 3 key strategic priorities for my office: maximizing impact, advocating for privacy in this time of technological change, and children's privacy.
I believe that as a small organization, it is important that we prioritize efforts on areas where we can have the greatest impact for Canadians and where the greatest risks lie if they're not addressed. In January, I launched a transformation at the OPC informed by a comprehensive review of internal structures and resources to increase efficiencies, streamline operations, amplify results, and make our service to Canadians as efficient as possible. Our response to the breach at PowerSchool this year is an example of this approach. My office engaged with the company to achieve a timely resolution by focusing on its response to the incident and implementation of measures that will result in stronger protection for the personal information of students, parents, and educators across Canada. Domestic and international collaboration remain a central component of my tenure. Last month, I was honored to be elected chair of the Global Privacy Assembly, the international forum which brings together the data protection and privacy authorities from all over the world. 2 weeks ago, I announced, along with my counterparts in Quebec, British Columbia, and Alberta, the findings of a joint investigation into TikTok, and this committee was interested in that file. This federal-provincial collaborative effort generated increased awareness for Canadians and will lead to improvements to the company's protection of children's privacy. Je vais conclure en réitérant qu'il est important de...
I will conclude where I began, on the importance of prioritizing privacy. Data has become one of the most important resources of the 21st century. Through modern laws, collaboration, and engagement, we can and we must create a regulatory environment that will benefit Canada's economy, support Canadian businesses, and protect the privacy rights of Canadians. I would be happy to answer your questions. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dufresne.
Congratulations on your election. I know that comes with great responsibility, and I'm sure you're going to be very busy with that. So we're going to start our first round. I'm going to, again, keep it tight today. I know we've been a little bit loose on time, but I'm going to try to keep it tight to give everybody an opportunity to ask both the commissioners a question. Mr. Barrett, I'm going to start with you for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Well, good morning, Commissioner. I have questions for you about legislation Bill C-8. There have been a pretty broad chorus of voices that are concerned about the sweeping and secret powers that cabinet ministers would have over the internet access and telephone access for individual Canadians, the power to secret powers to seize private data without warrant and conceal those actions from the public. So would secret orders to disable an individual's telecommunications access be inconsistent with the principles of the Privacy Act, and if so, why, sir?
Thank you for the question. So in the last Parliament, I appeared on Bill C-26 and talked about some of these issues when legislation aims at giving more power to the state to protect infrastructure and to disable and to take certain steps. And as Commissioner, I've always stated that privacy is not an obstacle to public interest. It's not an obstacle to national security or to strong economy, but we need to make sure that by protecting national security, we're not doing so at the expense of privacy. And so in cases like this, what I said to the committee was that we needed to put in the legislation a criterion on necessity and proportionality, making sure that the exercise of those powers is going to be tested from a privacy perspective to say, is this necessary? Does it achieve the result for which it's been put in place? And is it proportional? So that's the substantive element. And you mentioned secrecy. In certain instances, secrecy is necessary, but it should be challenged, and there should be ways for some reports to be made to appropriate authorities. It doesn't have to be necessarily that may make it public, but reports to my office, reports to a national committee of parliamentarians, or other means.
And so in your review of this proposed legislation, does it check all of those boxes?
Well, I will be waiting to testify on C8 when called, and we're reviewing that very, very carefully. But there is, I think, more to be done in terms of the reporting mechanism and the necessity and proportionality.
I would say for sure that there's more to be done. This bill proposes to let the government secretly cut a Canadian's phone or internet service, and the cabinet minister would have the power to issue the order, would prohibit that the existence of the order to cut that service prohibit its revelation, and that the order even existed, which would, of course, eliminate the ability for anyone, including you in your role as commissioner, to have any oversight whatsoever. Isn't this a direct circumvention of the act over which your mandate is concerned?
Well, that's why, again, to make sure that we're not making it more difficult to raise rights and to protect privacy, reporting to appropriate authority, even if done in a confidential manner, is something that I recommend. Making sure that there is ability for my office to be aware of it, to be able to raise questions. In some instances, a report to Parliament is appropriate. A report to committee is appropriate. And so this should be part of the discussion and the assessment to say, what type of reporting is there? Is it enough? But certainly, in my view, there should be confidential reporting to some authority who would be able to raise questions about it.
Currently, that doesn't exist in the legislation. What you're describing, what you describe as essential, is not included in the legislation. Bill C8 lets a minister compel data without judicial oversight. So this also creates a risk of a parallel system where Canadians' personal information, their personal data, can be seized in secret, again, with no redress by individual Canadians or by your office. Isn't this antithetical to the type of system that your office has been designed to protect?
Well, if my office is not aware of something happening, of course, we can't raise questions about it. We can't assist Canadians. And so I think, again, there will be instances where making something known to the public may not be appropriate, but we should challenge a claim to absolute secrecy. We should make sure that there's appropriate reporting to the appropriate authorities and that there is an appropriate means to raise questions.
Right. Of course, if your office doesn't know that the law is being broken, then I guess the government's contention is that they haven't broken the law. Do you think that a vague standard like, quote, any threat, which is the term used in the legislation, undermines safeguards in the Privacy Act, such as the requirement that collection or use must be necessary, proportionate, and authorized by law?
Well, we've advocated in the past, and as I say, I expect to be called specifically on this bill to address it, but as a general proposition, I recommend a necessity and proportionality to be in the legislation, made explicit, so that there's a strong test. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baird. Mr. Dufresne, Monsieur Sarré, pour 6 minutes. Commencez, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Dufresne, for your presentation, and congratulations. I have a few things to bring up, and it will show my age. I started working in telecommunications at 16, and I saw an evolution in communications, the affordability of telecommunications, and the arrival of social media, and now AI. This is something that I talk about with my students as well. the evolution of technology is happening very quickly, and governance and legislation are very important, whether it be in Europe, in Africa, but things are happening too slowly. My question is quite straightforward. You have knowledge and expertise, and I would like to know what changes we need in our legislation. What should be a priority? We need to defend Canadians' privacy. What needs to be changed? Answer. I think that both acts need to be changed for the public sector and the private sector. Legislation will never evolve as quickly as technology, as you said. But now we have a public sector law that dates back to the 80s and a private one from the beginning of the 2000s. So they need to be amended. I talked about necessity and proportionality. That's not there in the public legislation. That is a significant shortcoming. There needs to be certain obligations as well. The government needs to assess privacy factors when there are breaches, and something that is missing from both legislations is the ability for my office to impose fines or have order-making power, and that differentiates us from our international counterparts. Before moving on to my second question, you shared something important. You stated that protecting privacy would not slow economic development, and having digital sovereignty would in fact benefit economic development. Would you agree? Yes, but it cannot be done while forgetting international trade. So, data transfer needs to be done in a trustworthy manner. There needs to be very clear legislation, what can be shared, what cannot. Under what conditions do we allow Canadians' data to find itself in another country? There are contract rules and legislative rules regarding what companies can do, and we need to work on that. That is one of my recommendations. There needs to be a more stringent framework. Quebec does more with Bill 25. They include assessing different factors when it leaves Quebec. So we need a stronger regime. In Europe, there's a formal evaluation that can be done. In Canada, with the United States and Japan and other partners, we are working to create general rules for data transfers. That's an international priority. I would like to ask you for your advice. When we meet with businesses or people from the private sector, what should be our discourse? How do we tell them that protecting privacy is not going to hinder their business? We can see it in the data, and I'm sure that businesses can see it too, and they do share this with me. Canadians are concerned with their privacy. We see that in our results, and when they lose trust in a business, either because there was a breach or another issue, and so they will take their business elsewhere. They will find other providers. So the client's trust is very important, and in Canada, privacy protection is an obligation, but it is also part of our Canadian values. So a business that does not have good privacy protection is likely to be negatively impacted. And so increasing trust is good for business. Thank you. If we wanted to look at sanctions now, what have you looked into? There could be monetary sanctions that would have an impact on decision making, but my goal would be to not have to impose them frequently. Just the fact that they exist could be an incentive for proper decision making. Same thing for decision making powers. This allows us to have results more quickly. Currently, I can only make recommendations, and if they are not followed, then I need to turn towards the courts. It costs money and resources. But for sanctions, there's the reputational sanction that needs to be factored into as well. That's why our decisions are made public and we share our expectations for Canadians and international businesses. And we need positive incentives as well. We need to recognize businesses that are doing well and encourage them and close investigations quickly when companies are doing well. With Paraschool, the company worked with us, so we knew that we didn't have to have a lengthy, costly investigation. We had a commitment letter, and we were going to do the necessary follow-up, but we needed to encourage them. Thank you, Monsieur Dufresne, Monsieur Sari. Monsieur Thériault, you have 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Commissioner. I would like to start by asking you to talk about C2 regarding parts 15 and 16 on the authorities' ability to intercept or a seizure, fighting transnational crime and fentanyl is important, and I know you'll be back in our committee for the study, but I would like for us to target a few issues that you may have identified. As I was saying to Mr. Cooper regarding C8, I do expect to have to give formal recommendations. On C2, there are increased powers being given to authorities for certain things, sometimes with a mandate, sometimes without, and sometimes there needs to be criteria, reasonable belief or doubt. And so we are currently looking into all of this, and we want to see whether or not the proportionality and the necessity criteria are met. Are the criteria strict enough? If we're looking to Canadians' private data, rules need to be more stringent. We also need to know whether or not we have best practices for privacy protection. If information is being retained, is it being destroyed when it's no longer needed? Are reports being made so that questions can be asked or concerns raised? For most of that bill, we need to look at the criteria. Does it go too far? Is there too much wiggle room? And we need to ask these questions after the Supreme Court decision. They did look into this and saying that seizures could be problematic in certain cases. Could we force electronic service providers to give information without knowing how they work and what information is available without a person knowing? And also, the principle of necessity and proportionality, is it not currently being guaranteed by a judge? If we give a condition that is conditional, then yes, there is protection in that you need to seek a court order, but we need to know what the judge's powers are because they are limited by the legislation. If it states that the judge will give it, if it's useful for an investigation, that's easy to establish. If we limit what they can do, if conditions are met, or do we allow these judges to examine the impact on privacy, for example, and on the privacy of third parties, because we'll be looking into a Canadian's device and see discussions with other people, so the impact on other people needs to be examined. Police services need to have the necessary tools, but we need to know why they need that information and why it can't be done while ensuring the protection of privacy. I want law enforcement to have the tools that they need, but there needs to be the proper criteria that need to be met, and there needs to be report-making mechanisms as well. In the departmental plan for 2025-2026, you indicated that you have temporary funding. This temporary funding will be cut in 2026. Given the challenges that you have to overcome, do you believe that this will have an impact? And do you believe that that funding should be maintained given the size of the challenges? Yes, we need to maintain that temporary funding. That is a request that I have raised to Treasury Board and to the government. As an independent agent of Parliament, we still depend on government support. For us, it is problematic. We were given a mandate to investigate privacy breaches in the public sector. We did not receive any permanent funding for that, but the work is permanent and, in fact, is increasing. There are more and more leaks and breaches, and there's more significant impact in Canada and abroad. And so it is very problematic for us if we do not continue to receive funding. I hope and expect that a decision will be made. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thériault and Mr. Dufresne. This concludes the first round of questions. We're going to move on to our second round. Mr. Cooper, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner, the charter jurisprudence based upon the Supreme Court's 2014 Spencer decision and the more recent 2024 Bykovitz decision is clear. Access to personal data requires prior judicial authorization, correct?
Yes, those were the findings of the court.
Okay, and looking at the Bykovitz decision, the court confirmed that subscriber data is, quote, the key to unlocking a person's identity and online activity, and based upon that, the court affirmed that even IP addresses attract a reasonable expectation of privacy and therefore cannot be obtained without a warrant, correct?
Well, that was a finding in that case. Again, the argument was this information is not specific enough, so we can ask and obtain it. And in the court really found that we can draw so much about individuals with these types of data points, and so in that case found that a warrant was required.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And to satisfy. In order to obtain a warrant or a production order in this type of context, the standard that would have to be met is reasonable belief. Is that correct?
Reasonable belief. There's some instances where under the law it will be reasonable suspicion. So I think that is where some of my recommendations are, to the effect that when we're talking about sensitive information, it should be reasonable belief. We should have a more rigorous standard to assess that.
Okay. So with that in mind, I want to ask you some questions about parts 14 and 15 of the Liberal government's Bill C-2, buried within the so-called Strong Borders Act, are sweeping new powers to government agencies to demand Internet subscriber data. For example, Section 487.0121 of the Criminal Code, the proposed section, would allow police and CSIS officers to demand customer information from any company providing public services, including banks, telecoms, and social media, on a mere suspicion without judicial authorization. Have I got that right?
Right.
Okay. So in terms of understanding the implications of what that section would enable law enforcement to do, law enforcement, for example, could compel a bank without a warrant to reveal whether an individual is a client of a bank, how long they've been a client for, where they have accessed banking services, and provide the name of any person who has provided services to that individual. Is that fair?
I don't have the section in front of me, but that sounds right.
And it would provide warrantless access to subscriber data, including IP addresses.
Again,
Right?
sounds right.
That sounds right. And so it would seem to me that that completely eviscerates the standards set out in Spencer and in Bajkowicz, right?
Well, it modifies it. Parliament can do that. The question is it necessary and appropriate? And so when we look at this, we ask questions about why is it suspicion and not belief? Is it rigorous enough? Is there enough reporting? These types of questions.
Yeah. But it raises serious privacy implications, does it not?
It has privacy implications. You're making it easier to obtain the data.
And do you have any concerns about that?
Well, again, I'm giving in advance the testimony that I'm going to be given to the committee when called on that specific bill. But certainly, once what we've seen so far is we would have preference in it being reasonable belief as opposed to reasonable suspicion in some of those aspects because of the sensitivity of information. And so there are areas where the standard, in my view, should be higher.
And this would, and the standard would be higher in your view in this context.
Standard of reasonable belief as opposed to reasonable suspicion.
Well, and what about the ability for law enforcement to access sensitive personal information? I think you would concede the information that we're talking about here is sensitive personal information. You'd agree with that?
In many cases, it will be. In some cases, it may not be. But my point is, if we're talking about that sensitive information, the threshold should be higher. There's appropriate places for suspicion, but reasonable belief when we're talking about sensitive information is critical.
And
Sorry,
Okay.
Mr. Cooper, that's 5 minutes. Just a little bit over, not much. Thank you, Mr. Dufresne. Ms. Church for 5, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Dufresne, for being with us. So maybe just to pick up a little bit on this, could you take a step back for a moment? And in your opening remarks, you talked a little bit about how some of our frameworks have struggled to keep pace with technological change. And I'm thinking in particular the different provisions that we have in various laws in the criminal code that actually empower law enforcement, and how technological changes like strong encryption, like the cloud, like cross-border data flows, how are these new types of technology putting pressure on the framework that we have right now, and what have you heard about some of the need for change?
Yeah, so it is making the law enforcement work challenging, and it's making it brings innovation. It makes certain things easier. It makes certain things harder. And I think in the Supreme Court's decision, the court recognized that and said it is creating challenges for law enforcement authorities. Court talked about innovation also helping law enforcement authorities in certain instances. You can get a warrant easier and more quickly because of technology. You can get an electronic warrant and these types of things. So we need to look at the whole context. When I talk about necessity and proportionality, it certainly has to be context-based. And so something that was not necessary before may be necessary now because of new technology, new challenges. I think the goal is to make sure that law enforcement authorities have the powers that they need, but that they're appropriately challenged and limited. And so looking at those criteria, the question is, are we going too far in one direction, or are we going too far in the other direction? So it's always a balance, and that's the challenging work of legislators and courts.
And I guess sort of just picking up a little bit on that, do you also see, I mean, I guess in terms of thinking about the specific tools that law enforcement might require, do you have concerns about timeliness? Do you have concerns about national security and how these interface with the privacy regime? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's important for privacy authorities and national security authorities to talk to one another, to work together. So we work closely with NSIRA, National Security Intelligence Agency. And one of my goals is that we're not at cross purposes. So I don't want privacy to stand in the way of national security or law enforcement. And that's why we're working very closely with a number of bodies, competition authorities, copyright, but also FinTrack. So in terms of money laundering, financial crimes, we work very closely with them and Department of Finance to create more opportunities for banks to share information, to detect fraudulent and modern slavery types fraud and terrorism financing, but subjecting it to codes of practice that are reviewed by my office. So in that sense, there is protection of privacy. There is a demonstration that the privacy aspect is considered, but at the same time, we're allowing the authorities to have the tools that they need.
You read my mind in terms of where I was headed, which was actually around the uptick that we're seeing in online fraud, online scams, and how personal privacy is actually being misused and abused. And are there ways that we can do a better job of actually trying to crack down on the illicit distribution of personal information that's allowing bad actors to access personal information and use it in these ways?
Well, it is this collaboration between all players. So I work collaboratively with my colleagues, the other privacy commissioners, but also with cybersecurity experts in Canada and around the world. So we need to bring all of this together to say what are the best practices, what are the challenges, how do we do it by building privacy in the design, but building security in the design. So I think cyber breaches is a great example where it's a security issue, it's a privacy issue. So we need to work together to make sure that we have the tools that we need. We're not doing things at the expense of privacy. We're not doing things at the expense of security.
And are there ways in which we could actually enhance the individual's control over their own private information at this stage? Like things I'm thinking about, we have very little transparency online around what data is being collected, about the right for people to opt out of that data collection, the right to opt out of it being sold or brokered, the right to be able to delete it. Are these issues that you see growing here in Canada?
Absolutely, these are issues in almost all of our reports. So in our recent TikTok report, that was like half of the top issues was the consent and the information and the understanding of what information is being used, why is it being used, what for, and how much of it, so et cetera. I think in the context of breaches, it's also relevant. If you know what you're giving, are you aware of the risks of a privacy breach? The safeguards. So we ask questions and we challenge in the 23andMe joint international investigation that I did with the United Kingdom. We challenged the security methods. Do you have multi-factor authentication? Do you require strong passwords? And sometimes organizations are doing it perhaps with good intentions. They told us, well, people don't like complex passwords. It's challenging. It's hard to remember. So we understand that. But you need to insist on those because otherwise you're exposing yourself to these terrible harms that are sometimes impossible to undo. So that collaboration has to happen. Retention, you mentioned retention also. We need to challenge organizations, government and private sector, not to keep information, personal information or otherwise, longer than they need to because that increases the risk.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dufresne. Ms. Church, Monsieur Thériault pour 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. In June, you organized meetings for the roundtable on the authorities protecting data for the G7. This led to a common declaration that was shared in order to encourage organizations to prioritize privacy throughout the life cycle of technology and to promote protecting the privacy of children. How do you see the implementation of these principles that were in the declaration? And also in the context of cuts to your office? Thank you for the question. Government leaders meet up before the G7, and commissioners like myself do as well. And as chair this year, it was important for me to have a strong declaration regarding privacy by design. We were pioneers of that here in Canada. I discussed this with my colleagues at the G7, and we unanimously agreed to reinforce this and strengthen it. It is important and good for the protection of privacy, and this is a precondition to freedom and democracy and rights. But it also supports the economy. It will support children. So there is a consensus in the international community. We want to protect strong economies as well as children and their privacy. I think that it's important that the G7 shared that in a united voice, and we will continue that work with the Global Assembly. So we have joint investigations, for example, on TikTok, or having frameworks on data sharing and including certain conditions. We ask companies if they ask questions from the beginning, especially for small businesses. Earlier this is done, more the criteria will be rigorous and appropriate. For companies, do you feel like they want to collaborate or are they hesitant? We've seen recent examples that ended up in front of the Supreme Court. There will always be situations where a company or a government will be in disagreement. They seek clarification, and it's legitimate. But what's concerning in Canada is that I don't have order-making power. I can't impose fines, and things take longer than necessary. But generally, businesses are open to the implementation of such mechanisms. But they do need to have a common position internationally, and that's why collaboration is so important, and having these unanimous declarations is significant. It's important to say it's not only Canada doing this, it's the entire world, the G7, Asia, or Europe. And for those businesses having operations in different countries, they see the importance of respecting privacy. So we need to have prevention and education. We want to only have lengthy investigations when needed. We want to be able to solve things with commitment and working together. With new technology, there needs to be local measures, yes, but there also needs to be international or transnational collaboration. Yes, even in Canada, we work closely with the provinces and territories, not only to have better criteria for everyone, but to make it easier for companies. If they need to respect 20, 50 regulatory authorities, that's more difficult than receiving one answer. And that distinguishes privacy from other fields, because data travels and it is used for almost everything now, for decision making, for innovation. There can be good impacts, but it can have an impact on privacy, and working together is more important than ever before. Thank you, Mr. Thériault and Mr. Dufresne. This concludes the second round of questions. We're going to move on to our third round. Mr. Hardy, followed by Ms. Lapointe. We'll have 2 minutes and 30 seconds for the Conservatives and the Liberals. Mr. Hardy, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you for being with us today. I'm going to ask more general questions. I'm new here at Parliament, so we're talking about the trust of Canadians, public trust, and it's important for me that our institutions regain public trust. And in the transfer of data, there needs to be a third party that is able to represent trust for Canadians, do you believe that your office can do the work necessary, considering technology is changing so quickly? Do you have the resources that you need? We don't have enough resources. They haven't been increased, given the increased roles that we have, and they don't follow the increase in domestic and international issues and AI and all those elements that require more collaboration. I understand the fiscal context, that is quite difficult, but I am continuing to request additional funding. That said, we are going to do all that we can with the resources that we have, the legislation at our disposal. I reorganized my office. I reduced the use of certain resources. I optimized the use of other things, and persuasion and flexibility. So I will continue to use all of the tools at my disposal, including international collaboration and having partnerships. I'll give you an example. On 23andMe, the data breach, I carried out a joint investigation, and my counterpart had more powers regarding sanctions. We worked together, we came to the same conclusion, and this allowed my colleague to emit a fine. I did not have that power, but it did give us the results. We're talking about the protection of data, and I would like to look at the structure of Parliament now. You have important work to do, and being underfunded is a problem for Canadians, yes, but it's also a problem for government. It could be an issue internally. We were told that access to information is also underfunded. I think that if there are any issues, the fine is $3,000, and if you make more money leaving Parliament and to only have a $3,000 fine, it's nothing. And so do you believe that your funding should increase given the issues caused by AI and technology? Yes, I think that funding should be increased. I do believe that it's not because I ask for it that it needs to be given to me. A debate does need to happen, and my requests need to be evaluated, of course. But my increase will be justified, as you mentioned, because most notably about the quick evaluation of technology and the collaboration that we need, and breaches that unfortunately impact everyone. We are continuously hearing about it, and this undermines the trust of Canadians. So the additional resources that I'm requesting, I believe that these are investments that will help save money in the future, because these breaches cost a fortune for businesses and for governments when there are leaks, and we can get results, and this can have a significant impact on the Canadian economy. For data protection, could this be a shield in not sharing with Canadians what we should? Is it being used by the government to say, well, I'm protected by privacy laws, even though Canadians might question certain decisions? As Privacy Commissioner, when I hear that we can't do something because of privacy, I examine the reason why. I don't want privacy to be an obstacle to transparency or to national security. There is an exception in the legislation. The government can share something if it's in the public's interest. So there is some flexibility. Thank you, Monsieur Dufresne and Mr. Hardy. Ms. Lapointe, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Welcome. I'm happy to see you here at our committee. When you were clerk at the House, it was nice to see you then. I would like to hear you talk more about your priorities. You talked about technology and digitization and the privacy rights of children. Many might not know this, but I worked in retail, or I come from retail, before starting my career in politics. And what I'm hearing from retail is that there's a lot of theft happening, and it's happening, and it's groups. It's not a single person coming in, taking something and leaving. There's facial recognition and tools that people could put at their storefront to see whether or not these thieves are part of organized groups. You also mentioned that you work with the Privacy Commissioner of Quebec. Now, business owners are told that they can't use facial recognition, but you can imagine that there are many people, they come into the stores and these businesses can't use the tools to help counter the theft. So how can we strike a balance there? Thank you for mentioning Quebec. We are working closely with them, and with their Bill 25, there is information on biometrics. And that said, it is important to strike a balance. For facial recognition, we have joint declarations at the provincial and federal level stating that we are not 100% against the tool, that it should never be used, but there needs to be a rigorous framework and the matter of necessity and proportionality and transparency. We need to know if it's appropriate to use it. Are people aware of the use of that technology? There was a decision on Cadillac Fairview a few years ago. The concern was that people were not aware that they were being filmed or recorded, and so transparency is important. What information is being retained? Is it being held in data banks for a long time? Because that increases risks if there are data breaches. So it's important to have that dialogue, and I would encourage businesses to continue raising these concerns. If they find that they don't have the tools that they need, well, they can raise that with commissioners' offices. Not only if there's a complaint, we want to hear these concerns in order to make better recommendations. Thank you. That's what I was hoping to hear. I wanted to know what your suggestions were. So that's great. Now, when we talk about data storage and the cloud, this is concerning. It's where our data ends up. If it's in other countries, and you made reference to TikTok, that's one thing. But if our data is stored elsewhere, what can we do to ensure that it will be safely stored following our rules here? One of the recommendations that I have for modernizing the legislation on the private sector is that there be stringent rules regarding data sharing outside of Canada, that evaluations need to be done. So the framework needs to be very rigorous. There are certain things that we won't have control on. For example, if a foreign government will access that data, that's more difficult to control, but we can have international agreements and protocols and requirements in legislation, as Europe has done, to say they will be assessing the legal system in the other country to see whether or not it would respect the rule of law, so that people are explicitly aware. For TikTok, for example, we asked for things to be clearer, more transparent, that the data was going to China, and it was a possibility that the government of China accessed that data. And so we need to look at all of these elements And there are cases where it would be important to have data elsewhere, but there needs to be a framework. We might say that this data is too sensitive, it can't be abroad. Thank you, Ms. Lapointe and Mr. Dufresne. Mr. Barrett, 2.5 minutes.
Without meaningful limits, bills like C8, and specifically Bill C8, can hand the government secret, warrantless powers over Canadians' communications. This is a serious setback for privacy. It's also a serious setback for democracy. With no requirement for privacy impact assessments before these laws or regulations are passed, and with the serious implications that they have on Canadians' privacy, isn't Parliament simply being asked to grant sweeping powers of surveillance to the government without a formal review by the body, by the commissioner that Canadians, that Parliament has asked to do that very thing?
Thank you for the question. In fact, privacy impact assessment is something that Treasury Board directive requires government departments to do, but it's not a legal obligation in the Privacy Act. And this is one of the recommendations that I have made to Parliament, and I continue to make. It should be an obligation. There should be the opportunity for my office to give input before the fact when there's a major change, including legislation. So it's something to manage. There's cabinet confidences to be considered, but I would agree that that opportunity would be important.
And so you haven't had that opportunity with Bill C8 and Bill C2?
We're not consulted on the specific pieces of legislation before they're tabled. We have exchanges often after with officials, and they're good exchanges. But I think earlier consultation would make our feedback more meaningful, and our feedback would happen before it's tabled.
I don't think I have a tremendous amount of time left, but to continue to preempt your appearance on Bill C8 at another committee, do you have a particular amendment or guardrail that you'd like to see included in that bill before it comes out of committee?
Not specifically at this stage, but I'll just repeat. Necessity and proportionality, strict criteria for the exercise of powers, and appropriate transparency and reporting mechanisms. These are the things that we're looking for.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Saini, 2.5 minutes, sir.
Since you've been elected as the chair of the global organization, could you compare Canada to the rest of the world, where we are as a private commissioner or our legislation?
Thank you. So I think Canada is extremely respected around the world, and that was part of my election in that role. And so I think that we are very much a leader in that space, and we punch above our weight, and we want to do that. But I will flag that compared to other parts of the world, the fact that my office does not have the power to issue orders and to levy fines, that's an area where we are not as good as the rest of the world. That's a quick fix that we can improve to raise the level of Canadian privacy law to what's around the world. That being said, things like privacy by design, our strong privacy culture, our strong collaboration culture, I think this is something that we can bring to the world, and that's going to be part of my goals in this role.
So we are leaders in the world overall, but why do you think it's important that you would have the authority to lay fines? I just wanted to know your viewpoint.
Well, I think it's important because if we want organizations to build privacy in the design, we want privacy to invest money and time in building those things, we need to give the incentive for them to do that. It's hard for a CEO and for a board of directors to say we're going to spend millions of dollars when there's absolutely no risk and no financial consequence if they don't. It becomes something that feels like a nice to do, not something that you must do. So that's why this authority is important, and is certainly around the world, those risks, they exist for other jurisdictions. They don't exist here. That being said, I'm going to continue to use the tools that I have, including making reports public, including calling out organizations. But I think those two powers, they would make the system faster, less expensive, more transparent, and more effective.
June, you announced that you would like to have a youth wing of your group. Why is it that important, and is it going to incur additional expenses to your office?
I didn't hear the end of your question.
We're over time. I'm going to give Mr. Saini one more chance to ask the question, but I need a very quick response, Mr. Dufresne.
In June, you have asked for a creation of the Office of the Private Commissioner for Youth, Canada Youth Advisory Board. Why is it important, and is it going to incur additional expenses to your office?
Not significantly, no, and it's important because we need to hear the voice of youth. Children's privacy is one of my priorities. I need their perspective. I need to understand their realities, and that's what this council is going to give me.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Saini. Thank you, Mr. Dufresne. That concludes our first hour. Philip, I want to thank you so much for being here. Interesting and fascinating discussion. You have lots of work ahead of you, and you certainly need the support of Parliament to do your work. So I appreciate all that you do to keep Canadians' privacy private. So thank you, sir. And thank you to your staff as well. We're going to suspend for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to have Nancy Belanger, the lobbying commissioner, here. Meeting is suspended. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to start the second hour. And I'd like to welcome our witness for the second hour today from the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying, Nancy Belanger, who is the Commissioner of Lobbying. Ms. Belanger, welcome back to committee. It's been a while, and almost a year, and I'm sure you'll talk about the things you'd like to see with respect to the Act and everything we've been hearing about for the last couple of years. So please go ahead. You have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you so much. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président et membres du comité.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very pleased to meet a number of you for the first time and to speak to you about the work done by my office. The Lobbying Act requires that I maintain the registry of lobbyists, that I expand awareness and understanding of the lobbying regime through education, and that I conduct compliance work that supports respect of the Act and the Lobbyist Code of Conduct. The preamble of the Act recognizes that lobbying is a legitimate activity and that Canadians should know who is engaged in lobbying with federal public office holders and about what subject. Allow me to present you with an overview of the office's work. The number of registrations and lobbyists continues to grow each year. During 2024-2025, over 8,800 lobbyists were registered with over 6,000 active registrations at any given time. Communication reports for oral and arranged lobbying of designated public office holders reached just over 31,000 last year. As of September 30th, 2025, there are just under 12,000 communications reported. Last year, we delivered over 120 presentations. To date, this year, we have already delivered over 65. In our advisory role, we responded to over 6,000 requests last year. To date, in the current fiscal year, we have responded to almost 3,000. On the compliance front, we are currently advancing on 31 files, while 4 suspended files are with the RCMP. When I have reasonable grounds to believe an offense has occurred, I am required to suspend my investigation and refer the matter to a peace officer. For investigations conducted under the Code, I am required, once I conclude an investigation, to report my findings to Parliament. As you are aware, the Act imposes strict confidentiality requirements, and I cannot therefore discuss the specifics of these matters.
Turn to my office's current priorities. I have recently issued an interpretation bulletin with respect to the significant party duties registration threshold for organizations and corporations. This will reduce the registration threshold from 32 hours in a 4-week period to 8 in that same period. It will take effect on January 19th, 2026. I've also issued interpretation with respect to the 5-year restriction on lobbying for former designated public office holders. As you know, the Act completely prohibits former DPOHs from doing any lobbying during a 5-year period, both as a consultant for a client and as an employee for an organization. However, the Act allows former DPOHs to lobby as an employee of a corporation as long as the lobbying is not a significant part of the individual's work. Similar to the new registration threshold, this interpretation sets that a former DPOH employed by a corporation cannot reach or exceed 8 hours of lobbying in any 4 consecutive weeks. Accordingly, our priority is to ensure that organizations and corporations understand the new threshold so they can be compliant with the Act, as well as to ensure that employees who lobby on their behalf understand the ethical standards set out in the Code. We will also be supporting former designated public office holders to ensure their compliance with the requirements of the Act. I am pleased that this committee intends to study the Lobbying Act and propose updates, as outlined in a motion passed on September 17th. Some of you have heard me say numerous times that an update of the Act is long overdue. It is my hope that the study will proceed, and I look forward to supporting this committee in this work to identify important legislative and regulatory amendments. We deliver on our mandate and fulfill our corporate functions, including meeting extensive government-wide reporting requirements through the invaluable work of a small number of employees, approximately 35 staffed positions. The total annual budget for this current fiscal year is approximately $6.4 million. Roughly $4.9 goes to salary and benefits, leaving an operating budget of $1.5. About $700,000 of that operating budget is spent on obtaining services from other government organizations, including services related to HR, finance, procurement, and IT. The remaining $800,000 is used for goods and services, with continually increasing costs, particularly related to essential IT infrastructure. I'd like to conclude by thanking each and every employee of the office. I am proud that one recent media article about the Public Service Employee Survey noted that our office ranked as one of only 2 organizations with 100% of employees responding that their office is a great place to work. I am equally delighted that 100% of our employees responded that they're treated with respect. Indeed, our results in all categories of the survey are impressive. Ces réalisations ne peuvent être atteintes que
These accomplishments can only be achieved because of the employees' dedication, professionalism, and excellence in delivering on our mandate. For this, I am extremely grateful to each of them. Mr. Chair and committee members, thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Belanger, and what would an appearance before the Ethics Committee be without a request of a legislative review of the Lobbying Act? We hear it every time you're here, so thank you. Mr. Barrett, you're going to start us off for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon. Has there been a change in the number of files that or investigations that you've suspended? Having referred them to the RCMP, you said the number is 4. Is that a revised number since your last appearance before our committee?
yes, because I believe I have sent 2 in the last, 1 before end of March and 1 this summer.
Okay.
So that's an additional 2.
Okay. And so 2 rested and 2 additional. 2 rested with their office, and there are 2 additional.
2 additional since the last time I've appeared, yes.
Okay. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask if you're able to share any details about the files that you've referred to the RCMP.
Unfortunately, I can't. No.
Okay, thank you. There have been reports that the Prime Minister has met with corporate leaders whose firms are actively engaged with government. Would you consider those kind of meetings the type that would raise transparency concerns with your office with respect to lobbying?
Well, according to the Lobbying Act, every meeting that occurs between corporations about topics that are registrable, so whether it's about policies, programs, financial benefits, would be a registrable subject matter. Obviously, it depends if they meet currently the 32-hour threshold. But yes, if the topics are registrable according to the Act, they would need to be registered.
So all of those meetings, there was, for example, media reports late last week. I think there was a list of individuals from organizations who'd met with the Prime Minister. Those would all be registrable meetings.
They would be registrable if they meet the threshold.
Which is currently
32 hours, but it's changing in January.
In January. So you've said previously that transparency is the foundation for public trust. When someone with substantial private holdings provides policy advice to government, to cabinet, but they're paid to do it, is that still lobbying in spirit, even if it's not contrary to the law?
Well, if I understand the correction correctly, if someone is paid to lobby, then that's a registrable subject matter. But I didn't fully understand the last part. But it would be not in spirit. I'm not sure.
So
if someone is being paid to lobby, and it's about policy development, that's a registrable subject matter. Yes.
If someone is an executive with an organization, they have substantial public, or they have substantial financial holdings in addition to their corporate role, but are brought in to advise government in a non-paid advisory role. Is that not a violation in spirit of what we're trying to do with the Act?
Well, currently the Lobbying Act requires payment. And that will be one topic I will love to discuss with you during legislative review. In Yukon, they've added the concept of directing mind, where they do not require payment. And so that is definitely something I will want to discuss. But if somebody's not getting paid to provide the advice,
It's a loophole.
the act does not apply currently, yes.
Yeah, it's a loophole. We've seen this here, where in Mr. Trudeau's government, where they would bring in individuals from the private sector and ask them to advise cabinet, and these individuals are executives with global everything companies, and they're able to give this advice. They're not registered meetings, but they have these private interests that, of course, are going to be reflected in the advice they provide, and Canadians are completely in the dark about that. It's with chairmen and chief executives, and they claimed then that it was of high service to Canada, but certainly it also creates a real problem for Canadians about why the advice is being provided.
Well, of course, I'm a great believer in transparency. Currently, the scenario that you're giving me is not covered under the Lobbying Act, and I think that's something that does need to be looked at.
Do you think that the Act in its current form captures influence peddling when you have unpaid individuals?
If you're unpaid, the Lobbying Act doesn't cover it.
So
currently.
It's a class of shadow lobbyists.
If you want to give names to it, but I'm not in that business. So if I'm just telling you the Lobbying Act does not apply currently, and so it should be transparent. And I do believe if there's payment involved, then it should be, but if there is absolutely no payment, it's a requirement now under the Lobbying Act.
So this is the situation that we have with, pardon me for the interruption, that we have with these meetings that were listed. These CEOs, of course, are not going to be registered to lobby. They're not going to have been paid to be there in the capacity of lobbyists. The very same as Mr. Carney when he was the chair of Brookfield. He was brought in unpaid, but had these personal interests. And so these are shadow lobbyists that we have, and it's a massive loophole, the Carney loophole, and we think it needs to be closed.
There has been questions put to my office in relation to sometimes consultative committees, for example. I'm of the view that for certain CEOs, but for their current employment with their corporation or organization, they wouldn't be sitting at that table. And I have said to them that those need to be registered.
Wonderful. Okay.
So I do interpret it when I'm aware of it and I see names, I communicate with them.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Monsieur Salé, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Bélanger, for being with us. You mentioned that the Lobbying Act needs to be reviewed. I will be focusing on your role and the way you see things in my questioning, and your vision for the short and the long term. If we're looking at change, there are different dimensions we want to work on: urgency and importance. For urgency, what would be the things that are the most urgent so that the legislation reflects reality, the current reality of lobbying? We see it, that the role is changing throughout the world, and my colleague touched upon this earlier, but there is an urgency because the act was due to be reviewed in 2017, and we're still waiting for that, and we have missed out on 2 opportunities to make improvements. Now, the urgency is registration by default. Using ambiguous language, and corporations can say, well, we're not doing lobbying, we're not meeting that 32-hour threshold. There's a lot of lobbying being done that's not transparent. So that's the first issue that needs to be solved. And we talk about the important terms that need to be looked at. But also, secondly, if I think that there's an issue, I need to send the case to the RCMP, but not all cases are the same, and I don't have the discretion to make things public, to force training, to have administrative fines. I can't make public where there are shortfalls or infractions, and that's one of the main challenges or offenses. Another thing that is urgent is monthly communication reports. The only mandatory reports are oral reports, and they need to be organized in advance. So all meetings that you have with lobbyists at airports or on street corners don't need to be registered, and I believe that that's a problem. Those would be the three things, I believe. That's interesting. You talked about urgent matters, and you also responded to my second question, which had to do with shortcomings, and you did name a few. I used to work with organizations focused on public safety, and the goal is always linked to transparency and the trust of Canadians. I know that it's difficult to give a quick answer, but can these shortcomings undermine trust? Yes, absolutely. We talked about urgency and shortcomings, and now what would be the legislative changes that need to be implemented? I know that you will be doing a study, and I will be ready to give you my written recommendations as soon as you start. If the committee would like to receive the recommendations sooner, I will send them in. But yes, automatic registration for organizations, monthly reports for all discussions, regardless of who organized the meeting, and being allowed to have a spectrum of sanction opportunities would be good, but I do have about 20 odd recommendations. When we want to implement these kinds of changes, it raises certain concerns and concerns that would make the process heavier. I know that it'll take more time to respond to such a question, but could it make the burden heavier? When I hear talk about that burden, I don't believe in it. I think that it's a small cost to pay for transparency. It takes 5 minutes to open an account, about 25 minutes to put the information into the registry, and it's done only once, and then it only needs to be updated. So I don't think that the burden will be increased. I have a minute left. I strongly believe in education and awareness. I've done that in the past many times. You can tell that I believe in this, and I'm going to go now into my question. Do you have sufficient funding for that? I would like to have more money. I don't have enough in order to focus on all my priorities, but I do know that there are cuts everywhere, and currently I have not been impacted, and I'm happy about that. We're doing the best that we can with the competent staff that we have. But yes, it is a priority. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. You have 40 seconds. I said a minute 30 earlier. Now, for awareness and education, before coming here, I looked to European models. Do you believe, or rather, has your office looked at other countries that we could look to for inspiration? You mentioned opening an account in 5 minutes. Is this a shortfall in educating the lobbyist and the legislator? We focus a lot on awareness, and we do a lot as a small team. A study on Europe? No, I really don't have the resources for that. Thank you. Thank you. Monsieur Thériault, you have 6 minutes. Hello, Madam Commissioner. We have important organizations here, but they're not given the resources in order to do their jobs. And so they are asked to do a lot with not a lot of resources. In the departmental plan, it indicates for 25-26 that there are issues regarding staffing. There's competition, of course, and we're talking about specialized resources, of course. What is the situation like for you? How could you be more competitive? Are you seeking more personnel? In the departmental plan, it speaks to when I received additional funding in 2021 and 2023. So I was able to go from 28 employees to 37. I lowered it to 35. I don't think I'll be able to find 2 more people because I won't have enough to cover the operational costs. The operational costs are always increasing. I have less than 200,000 as a surplus every year, but for staffing, I'm pretty much at capacity. I have 35 employees, and I don't think I'd be able to hire any more because I won't have enough funding to do so. But you would have needs. Yes. When I started this work, we were 28 employees with a budget of 4.8. I made 2 requests. The first, I received it in its entirety. For the second, I asked for 8 additional employees. I was given 4. So this brings me to the budget request, and that we should have an independent process and not a process that goes through the government that is in place. But yes, I would, of course, like to have more staff. It's one thing to review legislation, but if we can't apply it, that's not sustainable either. So if you don't have the resources in order to implement our changes, we're not going to move forward. When I started to work on recommendations in 2018, 2019, I did carry out a study. There will be more transparency, but I don't think that it will burden the work of the office that much. There will be more people that will need to be registered. I might have to reorganize resources, but I'm not asking to double the resources. We are very efficient, and my team is very competent. Perhaps 10 additional employees, but we are really able to do the work. And we are very efficient. That's great to hear. Earlier, you talked about a range of sanctions. What would be the most significant ones for you? If I have to investigate, as soon as I have reasonable doubt that there's an offense, because any infraction is listed as an offense that I need to send to the RCMP. I have no discretion. I have to send it to the RCMP. My colleagues throughout the country have a spectrum that they can look at. They can start with the obligation to do training. There could be monetary sanctions that would be made public. There could also be the possibility to say that lobbying cannot be done for a certain period of time, and for more serious cases, they could be sent to the RCMP. I would like to have more flexibility. I'm asked questions about these cases in committee, and I'm not able to talk about it because I have to send them to the RCMP. And during the legislative review, I would like you to invite the RCMP so that you can get their perspective on this as well. That was going to be one of my questions, actually. Who should be the stakeholders that we should invite to speak to this review, other than you, of course? I would like to be there at the beginning and at the end. I'll come back as many times as you would like to hear from me. My colleagues in the provinces did legislative reviews. I believe that the perfect, well, almost perfect model is the one from BC. So you should invite my colleague from BC. Invite the RCMP as well. My Quebec colleague is working very hard on a legislative review. He would also be a good person to speak to. Thank you. You have 45 seconds. No. I'll come back to my questions later. Thank you.
Ontario's time. You mentioned Ms. Belanger, that 8,800 lobbyists have been registered in 2024 to 2025. Last time you were here, you've seen a significant spike in registered lobbying. So can you do a comparison off?
Probably an increase of 5%. I think we were at 7,700 the previous year. So there seems to be an increase of 5% every year. Now, the monthly communication reports went down from 34,000 to 31, but that's normal in an election year. Like technically from January to April this year, there were really a lot less monthly communication reports.
Are you able to supply the committee from a period, say, from 2015 to 25? Can you do that for us? Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
absolutely.
All right, that completes our first round. Mr. Cooper, you're going to start us off in the second round for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, on September 19th, 2025, the Globe and Mail reported that a real estate executive, a lobbyist, and a banker, who all happen to very conveniently be Liberal insiders, held an exclusive reception for Liberal MPs and cabinet ministers during the recent Liberal National Caucus retreat in Edmonton, where Liberal MPs and cabinet ministers were invited for a beverage to discuss politics. Now, to be clear, lobbying rules require lobbyists to report a meeting with public office holders, even if they are oral and arranged, correct?
Yes.
And under the Lobbying Act, reportable subjects include communicating with a public office holder regarding the development of any policy or program of the Government of Canada, the awarding of grants, contributions, or other financial benefits, the awarding of contracts, the making or amendment of any regulation or introduction of any bill. It's pretty broad. Have I got it right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, with respect to this reception, has any return disclosing communications with one or more public office holder on a reportable subject been filed with your office?
I don't believe currently, but they technically have until October 15th to impose any monthly communication report. So they have to do it by the 15th of the following month of when the communication would have occurred, if there was a communication during that period that would meet the definition that you've set out.
Now, can you understand why I and a lot of Canadians would really have a tough time believing that a reportable subject would not have come up in that context, with Liberal MPs, cabinet ministers being invited by a real estate executive, lobbyist, and banker to discuss politics?
So, well, the thing I have to say here is I've looked at that article and I've gone through it, and most of the people that were involved in this are not registered lobbyists. So that's the first element. The second element, if there was a registrable subject discussed, it would have to be on behalf of their employer or a client. So that's a second step before they would need to register. Having said that, if you don't mind letting me finish, when these types of events occur and the people that are not the ones that are organizing it are not the actually registered lobbyists, we do have a section in the Code of Conduct, 4.3, that says very clearly, you should not be lobbying people that possibly have a sense of obligation towards you. And some of the examples in there are because of gifts and hospitality that go beyond the rules. And I put that in there because, and that's another conversation we'll have during the ledge review, I do believe there needs to be corporate accountability, not just lobbyists' personal responsibility and accountability under the Act and the Code. So,
speak about a sense of obligation.
Yes.
Also in the Code, that encompasses political work. Is that right?
I do have a section specifically on political work, yes.
And here we have 3 individuals who just happen to sit on the Liberal Party executive.
And because of that role, it's maybe they're not lobbying, though. I don't know what occurred during that meeting,
Yes,
but for sure, if there are lobbying, then there's possibly some issues there, yes.
If there was technical compliance with the Act by the organizers of this reception, if you're in their position, why would you hire someone to lobby cabinet ministers to talk about a reportable matter, a matter that would otherwise be reportable, if you can host a reception, buy drinks, and use your position of influence to spend time with a cabinet minister or an MP to make your case because you're a Liberal insider. I mean, why would you pay someone when you can go directly and do what a lobbyist would do, but you just have a lot more access and a lot more influence? That seems to me to be, at least on the surface, what happened here.
But facts matter, right? So it really will depend on whether these individuals are there to represent anybody, and that's how the Lobbying Act applies and it works right now.
But it's certainly, there's a lot of smoke there, isn't there, on the surface? And even putting aside the specifics of this event, there's a major loophole in the act for the scenario that I just described.
I do agree that we need to have that conversation about corporate accountability and responsibility, yes.
Thank you, Ms. Belanger. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. We're going to go to Ms. Church now for 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
No, it's Mr. Gerber.
Sorry. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong list here. Mr. Sari, go ahead, please. Sani or Sari?
Saini.
Saini, Mr. Saini, go ahead, please. Sorry. I was looking at the wrong list. Sorry about that.
Madam Commissioner, as a commissioner, you work with other people around the world on issues. How does Canada compare to the rest of the world when it comes to lobbying, and what needs to be improved, if anything?
Thank you for that question. We used to be the leaders. Canada has now started to drop a little bit in many of the categories. We still are the leader with respect to the code of conduct. In fact, a lot of people around the world call me to figure out how I came to do the code that we have. But with respect to the act, we have fallen down. In particular is in areas, for example, spectrum of sanctions in relation to what's disclosed for corporations and organization with respect to beneficial ownership. So we're not as good as we used to be. And now I'm telling you, British Columbia is one of the leaders in this country, in the world, actually, as part of having some excellent elements that require registration and transparency.
Thank you. What type of a sanction would you like to see in the Lobbying Act? And how would those sanctions improve the application of your act that you're responsible for?
I think it would improve it because of the speed in which I would be able to, an event occurs, I look at it, and then I can impose possibly a penalty or obligation to obtain training. Now I have to suspend and send to the RCMP. It takes a lot of resources to investigate, do reports, and send, and then it takes time. And sometimes they're returned to me many, many years later. I think for efficiency, also for the public to have confidence in the work that I'm doing. I find it very frustrating to not be able to talk about a lot of these files. And I think there'd be an education component to be able to say, you know what, this person has been late 10 times in their last 10 registrations. Enough. Let's do a monetary penalty. And so these are ways that, we could improve the regime. And my colleagues in provinces have that power. I don't.
Thank you. In 2024, you said that Lobbying Act need to be reviewed every 5 years. Do you still believe that the Commission should be prioritized reviewing of the Lobbying Act? Do you still believe that should be happening? And secondly, what do you think the scale and scope of the review should be?
Okay, so the Act says that it must be reviewed by this committee every 5 years. The last time that happened is in 2012. So when I came here for my first nomination in 2017, I was asked, can you be ready in the spring of 2018? I said, I'll do my best. I will have been in the job for just a few months, and I was ready. I was asked in 2021 if I could share where I was at in my recommendations. So I shared a preliminary reports on my website. I shared it with this committee. I'm sure your clerk would have access to it back in 2021. It's a mandatory obligation to review, and we've lost 2 opportunities to continue to be improved and to be at the forefront. So yes, of course, I believe that the review of the Act needs to continue to happen. The scope, I think we should look at how to improve it from top to bottom, because every recommendation has an impact on the rest of the Act. So I do think that it should be a complete review.
You mentioned that often you have to send files to RCMP. Are those the activity which are criminal in nature, or is it every file that needs review, you have to send it to the RCMP?
So the Lobbying Act says being late to register is an offense. Providing false information on the registry is an offense. Lobbying while unregistered is an offense. Lobbying while prohibited from lobbying is an offense. Everything is an offense. So if I'm in an investigation, I must, and I find that breach, I must send to the RCMP. Now, what I do is I just don't investigate. Every time somebody is late, and there's 5, 6, 7, 10 people late a week, I just accept that registration for transparency purposes. But I'd like to be able to impose penalties, because eventually they're constantly late, and it's not good for transparency. Transparency delayed is transparency denied, so we do need to improve our regime. But every breach of the Act is an offense that I must suspend and send to the RCMP.
Thank you.
They're not all created equal, and I think we need to fix that.
Thank you, Ms. Belanger. Thank you, Mr. Sene. And I just, Nancy, Ms. Belanger, you're probably aware of this, but the committee has asked for the House, in an order of reference, to have this committee study the legislative review of the Act that you referred to hasn't been done. It can be done by any committee. It can be done by a Senate committee or a joint Senate Commons committee, but we have asked that this committee review it. So we're still waiting for that process to occur, but we expect that to happen soon. So, Monsieur Thériault, pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Thériault, you have 5 minutes. Earlier, you talked about the thresholds going from 32 to 8. Why not 0? That's a great question. I believe in that 0. It should be 0, but the legislation uses that. It states that the work is an important part of activities. So I need to do a legislative interpretation, and if I say 3 hours, well, then they'll say that it's not notable, it's not significant. So I looked at other jurisdictions that have the same wording as I do, and I looked at what could be notable and significant, and I came to the conclusion of about 8 hours. But I agree, it should absolutely be 0, but that change needs to happen through the legislation. Unfortunately, I cannot make it 0. I don't think I would win that fight. So if we were to change the legislation, it would give you the opportunity to make certain changes. Lobbying activities are easy to identify as soon as someone opens their mouth to speak. So that's what I didn't understand in going from 32 to 8, and I find 32 to be unreasonable. What happened is that when the legislation came into force in 95-96, this committee recognized that the language was vague and ambiguous, and so they gave the authority to the registrar to give the commissioner the opportunity to interpret what it meant. And that's the very beginning. And we did what the states were doing, looking at 20%. But 20% over a month, that's 32 hours. So I was hoping that the legislation would change, but yeah, we need to reduce that number. I chose 8 because I think that it can be defendable. I do like that you raised that, though, because I have carried out interviews, and somebody wrote to me to congratulate me, saying it should be 1 hour. And I agree, but I have to follow what the legislation says. So 32 to 8 is not the threshold that we should be comfortable with. We should seek to say 0. In BC, that's what they do automatically by default. There are a few exceptions if it's less than 50 years in a year and the company has fewer than 6 employees. And there are very few that have under 6 employees that do over 5 hours. But you can speak to the people from BC to get that information. I wanted to touch upon another topic now. In the departmental plan, we state that your office will reduce accessibility barriers regarding its website and the lobbyists registry. This is an evaluation that was done by a company that does this for the government. So this was for our office as well as for our website. We were talking about colors and the size of the font, and certain pages weren't wholly accessible, but we did fix all of that. And we should be receiving an A+ now. So for accessibility, things are going well. And we did a survey recently. I haven't seen the results yet. It should be concluding in the coming weeks, but I think that things are going well. But we did do that assessment to ensure that we were following guidelines. I have a question, and you can choose to not respond if you'd like, but when I saw that it had been since 2012 that the law had been reviewed, I wondered how that could happen. Do you have an answer? Why hasn't it been reviewed? How is it possible that it hasn't been reviewed? It's not for lack of trying, I can tell you that. And committee members here know it. I don't know what the explanation is. There were just other priorities. And there was the pandemic that happened as well. This committee had other studies that they needed to do, and the Lobbying Act was set aside. It's a good step in the right direction now to have a motion in order to review the legislation. Thank you. That's all your time. Thank you. Mr. Hardy, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being with us, and hello. For those who are listening, lobbying is an activity communicating with elected officials in order to influence their decisions or legislation to benefit a particular group. That is the definition. And this is something that I repeat when I meet people and people who have less and less trust in our institutions. Do you feel that you are supported, sufficiently supported? And earlier you stated that we used to be leaders internationally, but now we are seeing a decline. I think since 2016, 2017, since there was supposed to be a review, the legislation in BC was adopted in 2020. So 2012, we know what the situation was. In 2016, 2017, things started to decline. Well, there were a lot of legislation being adopted throughout the world that could be interesting to consider here. We're following behind. And why has it not been a priority for the government to ensure that lobbyists follow the rules? And another question, we're talking about 32 hours and the 20%, and now you're seeking 8. Is it because there are more and more lobbyists? I have seen an increase, but also in 2024, for example, there were 22 lobby days, Hill days, and there were no registrations. Why are we now finding ourselves in a world where there are more and more lobbyists? Is it because people are realizing that paying somebody's lunch on the side works? Well, I hope not, because there are rules on paying for lunch on this side, so hopefully there shouldn't be too many of those. I think lobbying is a good thing. It is important for all of you. You have to make decisions for Canadians, and you need to know what their concerns are and have that information. So we can't, and I know that people roll their eyes when we talk about lobbying, but it's a good thing, but it needs to be transparent and ethical. And now we had an issue with transparency. I did what I could for the ethics of it, but there's a problem with transparency. I see newspaper articles. I do these investigations, and proving that 32 hours is almost impossible. Looking at all of these meetings that are happening without registration, that's not good. It's a bit like the Wild West. The structure isn't solid enough, and as you mentioned, there are no consequences, or the consequences don't go far enough. Now, regarding the number of offenses that you sent to the RCMP and the number that come back to you, can you share that? That come back to me? Well, I've sent 18 since I became commissioner. So 18 in 7.5 years. 2 accusations were made. 2 files where there were talks, and you were saying about 10 per week that aren't following the rules. So is it that 18 of them had significant problems, or is it 10 per week? For those 10, it's registering. They're registering, but they're a few years too late, or I don't investigate. I ask them why they were late. I ask them to do the training, and I investigate if there is no registration. There's clearly lobbying happening. I come to see you as a witness, and then I see whether or not they meet the threshold and if it needs to be sent to the RCMP. As with access to information and privacy, the commissioners need more powers to ensure accountability for government and for those interacting with government. People who do lobbying and who aren't registered don't need to be registered. The issue is with the legislation and the interpretation of those 32 hours. So that is a significant problem. We need to be registered. Transparency is essential for democracy. Thank you. Ms. Lapointe, you have 5 minutes. I think we might have enough time for 2.5 minutes for the Conservatives and 2.5 minutes for the Liberal Party, following Ms. Lapointe's turn. Welcome to our committee. I found what you said very interesting. I would also like to congratulate you and your team for what you've accomplished. You stated that things are going very well with your team, but it's likely thanks to your leadership. Thank you. But for things to be going so well, it shows that your team appreciates you and your work is very interesting. That 32 hours and the 20%, and knowing that a review should have been done a long time ago, I presume that when you were nominated, you were preparing for the act to be reviewed. I hope that colleagues took into account the pandemic. We were all working remotely. It was harder to have cohesion. But you needed to prepare. And so I assume that you've already started working on your recommendations. As soon as you ask me something, I have something to give you. So my work is constant. I meet with my provincial colleagues who are also looking at their legislation, and they give me ideas. So I am constantly reevaluating recommendations there are some recommendations that I don't see as urgent as they used to be, and I do a lot of work with my team to focus on the ethical behavior of lobbyists and transparency. So you're prepared for us to review the legislation? Absolutely. You've said many interesting things, but when you were talking about having to send offenses to the RCMP, even though if you had a spectrum, you could offer training on whether or not you could do lobbying, when you needed to be registered. Should this information be available to everyone so people understand their role? Are you talking about our awareness activities? I have an obligation to inform the public as well. So we do focus heavily on awareness. We offer training. We have our website, of course. And we have social media. We often say that it's the 15th of the month. There's stuff that needs to be done. So I do offer training for public office holders and those who aren't sure what's lobbying, what isn't. We do offer a lot of training. 65 sessions have been offered, and we're only halfway through the year. I never say no to a request to make a presentation. I have 4 advisors who also offer training, but you're right. Canadians need to be able to understand and not roll their eyes every time they hear the word lobbying. It's not a problem. It just needs to be transparent. I do understand what you're saying. You want to share what your business represents, and we need to see where the legislation can be changed. It was very interesting what you said. You mentioned BC and Quebec, that things are going well. For other countries now, I know that my colleague tried to ask that question, but are there countries that we could look to? You mentioned inviting the RCMP, BC, Quebec, but are there other countries that we should visit and look to? France could be an option. They have a very recent regime that's quite avant-garde. And maybe you could also invite the OECD. They look at that spectrum and the different elements, and they have recommendations. I discuss things with the OECD frequently, and I think that they would be a relevant team to invite. They could compare everything that's happening throughout the world for you. Thank you. I think that we will add the OECD to our list when it's time to carry out the study. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lapointe.
Up on what Ms. Lapointe said, it's kind of an unusual request, because typically when we ask for a list of witnesses, we'll ask each party to submit their list to the clerk. I'm going to make a suggestion, Ms. Belanger, that you and your staff come together with a suggested list of witnesses for this study that you could supply to the clerk for us for consideration, okay? In addition to the other requests I asked you for.
The only thing that I would caution, I will not recommend, of course, I think you should speak to the community of those who are regulated by me, but I'm not going to suggest particular lobbyists, et cetera, because I don't think it would be fair and et cetera. But of course, anyone else, yes,
BC,
absolutely.
Quebec, you've mentioned Ontario as well.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
in addition to what you've mentioned, if there's anything else that you can consider that would be helpful to the committee, I'd appreciate that, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. Monsieur Hardy, pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Alors,
Thank you. I think that everyone agrees that things need to move forward, and 2012 is a long time. So we have the ethics commissioner who manages public office holders like us, and you manage the lobbying. Do you have a good working relationship? And if an elected official works with a lobbyist, would it not up to the ethics commissioner to intervene? I'm not sure that I understood the scenario. I do have a great working relationship with the Ethics Commissioner, and when I was nominated, Mr. Dion and I signed an agreement in order to do training together. But I don't quite mirror the Ethics Commissioner. Lobbyists deal with you, but also with senators and public servants, so it's not exactly the same thing. When somebody leaves, you will be told to be careful because you cannot do lobbying for 5 years. Don't forget to communicate with the lobbying commissioner. So I think we do have a good relationship, and we try to work together for training. Last week, experts told us that it's a smokescreen for Prime Minister Mark Carney. Do you believe that it's as simple as having two people working for you and that no lobbyist can have an impact? I'm not sure that I should comment on that. It's not in my purview. But I would say, and it happens frequently, when a lobbyist becomes a public office holder, we recommend to those that were working with him to not do lobbying with them or with their entourage for a certain period of time. That's what we recommend, but if they don't do that and they're not following the Code of Ethics, and I will have to make a report to Parliament, and I haven't had issues thus far. Mr. Sari. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. And again, thank you for responding to our questions. In April 2025, there were many who were elected for the first time, including myself. It was my first time being elected at the federal level. I worked for the municipal government for 8 years. And we're going from a municipal pool to a federal ocean, if I can explain it or describe it in that way. And what advice would you give? Because we talked about lobbyists a lot, but I think new colleagues feel like targets, especially now with our new role at the federal level. We have received some training, but what would be your advice to newly elected members? Well, when you meet with potential lobbyists, you should ask them to reach out to my office. And every time you meet with them, consult our registry. You can see with whom they spoke before meeting with you. And also take notes. Please document your meetings with these people, because if they are not registered and I have to investigate, I will be knocking on your doors to get information, and I would appreciate getting as many details as possible. So please document your communications. So that border between lobbyists and people who can influence our decisions, we wonder if they need to be registered. Do they have an obligation to be registered? Should we always reach out to you before meeting with groups? You can meet with them. It's not up to you to ensure that people who are meeting with you are registered. That's my responsibility. But I would ask you, if you meet with them and they're not registered, you can tell them that it is lobbying. It's communication regarding a bill, a policy, and tell them to reach out to my office. If it's an organization that's meeting you just once, they're not meeting that 32-hour threshold, but in January they might be reaching that 8-hour threshold and should be communicating with us. Thank you, Mr. Sari.
Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. The information that you provided has been valuable, and appreciate the work that you're doing and your staff are doing to keep everything on track. So once we get to the study, I'm sure you'll provide some valuable input. Okay, we have no other business. Ms. Church?
Mr. Chair, I was just wondering, you'd made a request for data from the commissioner dating back to 2015, the number of lobbyists. I was just wondering if we could get that back to 2008 when the act was created. Would that be amenable?
Yep, I have no,
In fact, I think some of it's already in annual report, so it will not be hard work to get that done.
point of order? Right. No problem with that. So if you can do that, Nancy, I'd appreciate that. Thank you to everyone.
Is okay?
Yes, that's,
Yeah.
yeah, usually, I know your office is very quick in responding, so thank you. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you to everyone who made this meeting possible. The meeting is adjourned.